The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the downtown coffee shop, casting golden stripes across the marble floor. Sarah Mitchell sat alone at a corner table, her fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug that had long since gone cold. She stared at her phone screen, reading the same 3 sentences over and over again. "It's over. Don't contact me again. I've moved on." 15 years of marriage, reduced to a text message. She set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter, and reached into her purse. Her hand found the folded receipt she'd been carrying for the past 3 days. She pulled it out slowly, smoothing the creases against the tabletop. The numbers printed there told their own story: $0.00. Their joint account, $300 million, gone. Sarah took a breath and looked out the window. Across the street, she could see Marcus standing with a woman she'd never met before. His arm was draped casually around her shoulders. They were laughing, completely at ease, as if the world belonged to them and them alone. The woman wore a coral-colored dress that caught the morning light. Marcus wore his favorite tan suit, the one Sarah had helped him pick out for their 10th anniversary. She watched them for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, for the first time in 3 days, Sarah smiled. The story of how they'd gotten here began long before that morning. It stretched back through years of careful planning, subtle moves, and a patience that Marcus had never quite understood. But perhaps it's best to start at the beginning, when 2 ambitious people met and built an empire together. Sarah and Marcus had been college sweethearts. She'd studied finance while he pursued business management. They complemented each other perfectly, or so everyone said. She had the analytical mind, the ability to see patterns in chaos and predict market movements before they happened. He had the charisma, the networking skills that opened doors and sealed deals with a handshake, and a smile. Together they'd built Mitchell Enterprises from nothing. Sarah handled the investments, carefully growing their capital. Through strategic acquisitions and brilliant market timing, Marcus handled the public face of the company, charming investors and clients, making everyone feel like they were part of something special. The money had come gradually at first, then all at once. 50,000 became 500,000. 500,000 became 5 million. 5 million became 50 million. And then, in one extraordinary year when Sarah's predictions about emerging technology markets proved devastatingly accurate, they'd crossed into territory most people only dreamed about. $300 million sat in their joint account, a testament to 15 years of partnership. But somewhere along the way, Marcus had started to believe his own press releases. He'd started to think that the success was all his doing, that his charm and his deals were what mattered. The careful analysis, the hours Sarah spent poring over financial reports and market data, the strategies she'd mapped out in careful detail, all of that faded into the background of his mind. And then he'd met Veronica. Sarah had known about Veronica for 8 months before Marcus sent that text message. She'd known about the expensive dinners charged to his personal credit card. She'd known about the weekend, business trips that somehow never resulted in any new contracts. She'd known about the secret apartment downtown, the one Marcus thought was so cleverly hidden. She'd known because Sarah Mitchell had built her entire career on paying attention to details that other people missed. When she first discovered the affair, Sarah had sat in her home office for 3 hours, perfectly still, thinking. Her initial instinct had been anger, then heartbreak, then a sort of hollow disappointment that felt worse than either of the other emotions. But as the night wore on, her analytical mind had taken over. The same mind that had made them wealthy beyond imagination. If Marcus wanted out, he would try to take everything. She knew him well enough to predict that. He would use his charm, his connections, his lawyers. He would paint himself as the driving force behind their success and her as merely a supporting player. And in the court of public opinion, his version might even win. After all, he was the face everyone knew, the voice everyone heard. Sarah had spent the next 8 months preparing for the inevitable. She'd started quietly, moving pieces around like a chess grandmaster thinking 10 moves ahead. She'd established accounts in her name alone, transferred certain assets through perfectly legal channels, repositioned investments in ways that would seem routine to anyone who glanced at the paperwork, but were actually carefully calculated moves. The joint account, that massive $300 million symbol of their partnership, she'd left exactly as it was. Every penny remained in place. She wanted Marcus to see it, to know it was there, to feel confident that he had access to everything they'd built together. Because Sarah understood something fundamental about her husband. Marcus always felt smartest when he thought he was getting away with something. 2 weeks before he sent the divorce text, Marcus had met with his lawyer. Sarah knew about the meeting because she'd always had access to his calendar, something he'd forgotten in his excitement about his new life. The lawyer had apparently advised him to wait, to be strategic, to protect himself legally before making any moves. Marcus, confident and impulsive as always, had ignored that advice. He'd sent the text on a Tuesday morning while Sarah was at the coffee shop, their regular meeting spot from the early days of their relationship. He'd probably thought the location was ironic, a poetic ending to where they'd begun. Then he'd transferred every single dollar out of their joint account into an offshore account he'd set up 3 months earlier. What Marcus didn't know was that Sarah had been expecting exactly this move. In fact, she'd been counting on it. The offshore account Marcus had established with such secrecy was actually one Sarah had been monitoring since the day he'd opened it. She'd traced the web of shell corporations and international banks with the same skill she'd used to build their fortune in the first place. And she'd noticed something Marcus had been too distracted to catch. The account had been set up with a small but crucial flaw in its legal structure. By transferring the marital assets into that account without a formal divorce agreement, without legal authorization, Marcus had essentially stolen from himself. More precisely, he'd put $300 million into an account that, due to international banking laws and the specific way he'd structured it to hide money from potential taxes, was now frozen pending investigation of suspicious large transfer activity. The flags had gone up automatically within hours of the transfer. Sarah knew they would. She'd studied the regulations carefully. Marcus would eventually get his money back, probably. But it would take lawyers, months of legal proceedings, international cooperation between banking authorities, and a level of financial transparency that would expose every questionable move he'd made in setting up the account in the first place. He'd likely face fines, possibly tax penalties, and definitely the kind of public scrutiny that would destroy the carefully crafted image he'd spent years building. Meanwhile, the assets Sarah had quietly repositioned over the past 8 months, the real estate holdings, the separate investment accounts, the stakes in various companies that she'd always been listed as primary owner of because of her role in acquiring them, remained entirely under her control. When calculated carefully, they amounted to approximately $320 million. Sarah had always been better with numbers than Marcus was. She took another sip of her cold coffee and watched as Marcus and Veronica crossed the street, heading toward the parking garage. They were still laughing, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break over their heads. Marcus's phone would probably start ringing within the hour. International banking authorities didn't waste time when a 9-figure sum got flagged for suspicious activity. Sarah's own phone buzzed. She glanced down to see a message from her lawyer. Papers filed. Your assets are protected. He can't touch anything. She replied with a simple thank you and put the phone away. Standing up, Sarah gathered her things slowly and deliberately. She left the receipt on the table, that $0 balance, from the joint account that Marcus thought represented his cleverness. She wouldn't need it anymore. As she walked out of the coffee shop into the bright morning sunshine, Sarah thought about the future. She thought about the business she would build on her own, without someone taking credit for her work. She thought about the charitable foundation she'd been planning, focusing on financial literacy for young women. She thought about traveling to all the places Marcus had always been too busy to visit. Mostly she thought about how strange it was that Marcus had never really understood the most basic principle of their success. Sarah had always been the one who knew how money actually worked. She'd been the strategy behind every major decision, the architect of every successful investment. Marcus had been the salesman, important in his own way, but never the foundation. He'd sent her a divorce text and emptied their account, thinking he was making a power move, seizing control of his destiny. He'd never realized that Sarah had been ahead of him from the very beginning. And now, while he scrambled to explain to investigators why he'd suddenly moved $300 million into a questionably legal offshore account, Sarah would move forward with her life, her assets secure, her future entirely her own. Sometimes, she thought as she walked down the sunny street, the quietest moves are the most powerful ones. Marcus had always loved the dramatic gesture, the bold play, the moment when all eyes were on him. Sarah had always preferred to work in the background, patient and precise, building something that would last. As it turned out, her approach had been the better investment all along. Behind her, she heard someone calling Marcus's name urgently. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Sarah Mitchell was already thinking about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days that would come after, days that were finally completely her own. The account might have shown $0 that morning, but Sarah had never felt richer in her entire life.